So, welcome to the crosstalk on economics and culture. We're going to do a bunch of things. What I'm going to do is spend a couple of minutes introducing the panel, and then we'll each talk. First, let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Peter Reiss. I am a professor of economics at Stanford Business School, and by courtesy, the economics department at Stanford.
I'm Frank Wolak. I'm a professor in the economics department, but I'm not a professor in the business school by courtesy because Peter refuses to get me one. But
my name is Jing Tsu. I'm professor of modern Chinese literature and culture at Yale University.
Okay, so just by way of overview, the point of these crosstalks we take to be to explore points of contact between diverse fields, and we're very diverse up here. So we have two economists, and we have our token literature and cultural studies person. So you probably are thinking already this is the hegemony of economics. Let me begin by telling you what we're not going to do. I feel somewhat like the movie director whose film has been way overhyped. So you're probably thinking, oh, they're going to explain to us what culture really is, what economics really is. And we're not going to do that. We're going to take a somewhat narrow perspective of we're coming at this point of contact, economics and culture. What does economics have to say about culture? What does culture have to say about economics? And we're somewhat handicapped because neither of the two economists does research in culture. And I think Jing will be the first to say that she doesn't do research in economics. So I guess the point is, what is the point of today's session? Given we're not nominally experts, and I think what we have decided is sort of the real purpose of these crosstalks is to talk about the way that our fields would talk to one another over something like culture. So that's the focus of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to, when it comes to me, I'm going to talk about empirical work that economists have done on the question of what is the influence of culture on economics and vice versa. Frank is going to lead off with a 5-minute discussion of generally how do economists think about questions leading up to the point of contact about how do economists actually think about conceptually the topic of culture. What is the goal of economics in trying to deal with culture? What do economists think they can say about culture? And Jing, who's going to go last, is going to spend about 5 minutes talking about, from her perspective, where does her field bump up against culture? What does her field have to say about culture? And how does that potentially bear on the way that economists actually think about the question of culture? Then we'll spend some time talking to each other, asking questions, and then we'll turn it over to you so you can ask us, why didn't we touch on that favorite aspect of culture? So again, the caveat is we're trying to talk about, in some sense, method, the way our fields approach the question of culture. We're not going to talk about what is culture. We'll leave it to you to define that. You can think of your own favorite definition. We're more interested in talking about the way we as researchers in different fields would approach the topic of culture. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Frank.
Thank you. So the way that economists typically think about economic outcomes is they're being driven by 4 factors, what we'll call preferences, technologies, endowments, and beliefs. And this doesn't mean that economists don't believe that culture plays no role in determining economic outcomes. In fact, I think most economists would agree that essentially these 4 building blocks give rise to what many would refer to culture, but that culture can also impact one or more of these building blocks. So what I'd like to do with my time is define what economists mean by each of these factors, then give just a simple example of how I think you could combine them to give rise to what one might call culture, and then moreover how culture could impact one or more of these factors. Then I'd like to explain a little bit about why economists are so interested in learning these 4 building blocks and give some examples about that and why economists focus much of their research on exactly that. So on to the factors. The first is what economists call preferences, and this is just simply saying that we assume that individuals can rank bundles of goods. So if you face this consumer with any given bundle of goods, where goods are very broadly described, it can be essentially characteristics of the environment they operate in, then the individual can tell you one of two things: that he prefers good bundle A to bundle B, or he's indifferent between bundle A and bundle B, or he essentially prefers bundle B to bundle A. The second factor is technology, and this is just saying that it is the set of feasible outputs that can be produced from a given bundle of inputs. So take the example of an automobile. The technology of producing an automobile would say, what is the amount of steel, leather, labor, electricity, et cetera, needed to produce one automobile? And that would be an example of the technology of producing an automobile. The third aspect is endowment. So essentially, what agents own what assets or productive resources. And then the final feature is what is beliefs. So in other words, what does an agent believe about unknown features of the economic environment or unknown features about the other participants in this economic environment? And beliefs are an important aspect of, how you could think of culture might arise. So how might an economist use this sort of these four building blocks to construct something about culture? Well, a simple example I thought of is the case of, say, the cooperative nature of Scandinavian culture, just using preferences and beliefs. So the idea would be is historically, you're a farmer in Scandinavia, you're worried about starving to death or dying alone in this extremely cold weather and very poor agricultural conditions. What you're going to do is figure out that, gee, if farmer A is willing to help farmer B in times when farmer A needs help, and because he believes that farmer B is going to help farmer A, then essentially both are going to figure out that, gee, some sort of mutual cooperation among us is going to allow us to achieve a higher average level of, as economists would call, discounted present value of well-being. And in that sense, we're going to find that we would find it beneficial, mutually beneficial for each of us to cooperate. And so we would see an outcome that looks as if this sort of cooperative culture is arising. And the interesting thing then could be is, well, a counterfactual could be, well, if we took these individuals and, say, transferred them to a tropical environment where, food was readily available, the risk of dying from exposure was minimal, we might expect that, the counterfactual would be that there'd be less cooperation, and they'd therefore expect to see less of it. The opposite example of how culture could impact one of the four building blocks could be the fact that, if I grow up in a culture of where cooperation is the norm, then presumably what that could do is both change my preferences in that I like cooperative outcomes in terms of the bundles of goods and services that I see, as well as I have a prior belief that others will be cooperative if I get into environments where cooperation is a possibility. So the second point that now I wanted to talk about is, so why are economists so interested in learning about these basic building blocks of technology, preferences, and the like? Is that because typically we believe that those are invariant to the economic environment that I operate in. So for example, it doesn't matter what day of the week it is or where I'm located, my preferences over bundles of goods are essentially the same. And so the nice thing there is that knowledge then of these building blocks are going to give the economists an ability to make predictions about things that haven't yet occurred. For example, in the case of the 1960s, many economists used this approach to make predictions about what might happen in the airline industry if it were deregulated, and these studies played a major role. So another area where these building blocks can be important is in terms of antitrust law. For example, the Sherman Antitrust Act prohibits firms from merging when prices will be increased. So I could use my knowledge of these basic building blocks to come up with the structure of technology for the various firms in the industry, the preferences consumers have for these goods, and then I could combine the two firms' technologies into the new firm that's merged, compute a new market equilibrium, and assess whether or not prices would rise. Then I could take the next step and say that suppose that the merger had occurred and then assess whether or not, in fact, do I see that after the merger, the predictions that my ex-ante model had made, built upon these 4 basic building blocks, was borne out in terms of the actual prices that have prevailed pre versus post-merger. And this is an area where, in fact, I've actually done work in looking in terms of this sort of ex post validation of the predictions of my ex ante model. And this, I hope, at least gives you some idea of why economists are interested in uncovering these four basic primitives underlying the economic environment, because it essentially gives us this ability to make these predictions outside of things that have yet to occur or might occur. So I'll turn that over to Peter.